Property Services webinar on Vacancy Wood, Chief Executive of NHSCC, and I'm going to chair the webinar today. I'm joined by 4 colleagues from NHS Property Services who are going to take us through a relatively brief presentation, and then it will be opened up to you all to give us comments, ask questions, provide some feedback before we close the webinar at the latest at 2 o'clock. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to John Westwood. John is the Director of Assets Management at NHS Property Services, and he's going to kick us off and introduce you all to his colleagues. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Julie, and thanks for inviting us along today to join this session. So welcome to everybody on the phone. So as Julie says, I'm John Westwood. I'm Director of Asset Management at NHS Property Services. I've been in post there for about 2.5 years now, so becoming part of the furniture. You know, one of the things we recognised, you know, and I certainly recognised when I joined, is, you know, we do need to create more dynamism in the portfolio to enable it to align better to the needs of occupiers, and you know that starts really with trying to tease out inefficiencies in the estate. So part of that strategy is the vacant space handback scheme. So I brought along with me 2 colleagues, Kate Richardson and Mike Parker, so you can actually get to hear from the real experts on this. The purpose of today is to really, you know, get the scheme out there, increase awareness, help explain how it works. So hopefully some of the confusion around it can be ironed out, and give you an opportunity to ask us questions on you know how you can participate in it. So firstly, you know, what is it? You know, it's a scheme that was introduced in August 2017. It was a long time coming, partly because you know, we wanted the endorsement of the system, we wanted the endorsement of the Department of Health and NHS England to get everybody on board. So it has taken a while to get to where we want to be. But here we are. It's a scheme which is designed to help commissioners cut the cost of empty space in buildings, which should leave more money to spend on frontline care. As I said just now, you know, it's part of an overall strategy to improve space utilisation and reduce costs of the NHS estate. There are other things that we're doing, including initiatives which are coming on sessional space, etc., which will improve access and efficiency across the estate. You know, it's endorsed by Lord O'Shaughnessy. He's aware of this, and you know, it's said that it's an important part of our ongoing efforts to help the NHS make the most of its estate. You know, there is quite a lot of vacant space in the portfolio that you know we really need to get to grips with and reduce the burden on the system. So who's the scheme open to? You know, hopefully you can see on the slide there now. CCGs can apply, NHS England can apply, and the CSUs can apply. ALBs, local authorities, providers, GPs, and commercial tenants are excluded. You know, the reason for this is we really want to put CCGs in the driving seat of influencing where services are commissioned from. You know, so as things stand, you know, we want, you know, if there are other entities out there providing commissioned services, the important thing is that the CCGs have control of this, and as I say, can influence where the services are provided and you know, configure the estate as it needs to be. You know, this is very much around promoting a more efficient use of the health estate by encouraging a greater link between location-specific commissioning and the use of existing assets. So I'm actually now going to hand over to Kate Richardson. As I say, the real experts can start talking now. And Kate's going to talk about, you know, the starting point for the scheme, which is really around agreeing
So just a little bit further introduction on my role in this. I'm part of the strategic estates planning team that's made up of strategic estates advisors who are attached to every single CCG in the system. You should all know your strategic estates advisor and be able to lean on them for support. So I'll just talk a little bit about the realisation list, which is really the sort of the first part of the vacant space scheme. So really simply, a realisation list is formed of, it's effectively a download of all of the information of property assets that are held by each of the CCGs. And that's everything. So it won't just be properties that are occupied by the CCG. It would also include properties that are the financial responsibility of the CCG, which obviously is a really important consideration because we are aware that there is quite a bit of vacant space in the portfolio generally, and a number of CCGs are obviously holding some quite significant vacant space costs, and that's what this is all about. So really, the realisation list is, it's a data set, and what we need to do is pull together a list that categorises your properties, and I'll come on to those categories in a moment. So really, what those realisation lists are talking about is which of your properties are vacant today, and what might become vacant, and what you might put into the scheme. A realisation list is it's an essential part of the vacant space scheme. You can't enter a property into the scheme without one. It's worth mentioning that just by having a realisation list doesn't put you under any obligation at all to enter anything into the scheme, but it is worth having a realisation list in place. We are creating the opportunity to review those realisation lists twice annually because we are aware that things will change. So the question really, perhaps from some people, is what's the point of having a realisation list? So the reason that we are asking for a realisation list is so that it gives the property company some visibility or a forward view on what might be coming in. The NHS Property Services portfolio is significant. It's about 3,500 properties. And what we need to make sure is that we've got the right level of resource and the right level of, we understand what might be coming in to the property company. It hasn't been a tidal wave just yet, but it might be. And actually, we're hoping that there will be lots of properties coming into the scheme because that's, after all, why we've put it in place. It's designed to be helpful and help get property under the responsibility of people who are good at managing property. Which, to clarify, is NHS Property Services. So how do you go about creating a list? You'll work with your strategic estates advisor. So your strategic estates advisor will have this base list. Everything on there is defaulted to a category 4, which I'll talk about a bit in a moment. And then you work through the list in terms of categorising each of the properties. And then you can finalise that list, and then the list then gets submitted into the scheme, which we'll talk about. So effectively, that gets submitted as a final list into the scheme. But as I say, it can be reviewed up to twice a year. You don't have to review it twice a year, but we wanted to sort of set it up so it was fair on the basis that we know that things change. So I'll talk a little bit now about the categories of space that could be, that you can use. Categories 1 to 4, so quite simple, really. Category 1 is currently surplus or likely to be surplus in the current financial year. I think that's quite factual, actually. Effectively, if you've got a property that's vacant today, you should be categorising it as a 1, and if you've got a plan that you're in the process of delivering, to empty a building, then it should be categorised as a 1. Category 2 is a short-term hold. So if it's likely to be surplus next financial year, then put it in as a category 2. I would suggest actually that any property that you're considering strategy on at the moment should be down as a 2, because it has to be categorised as 1 or 2 to be accepted into the vacant space scheme. if it isn't categorised as 1 or 2 and you put a property vacation notice into the scheme, it will unfortunately be turned away until the next time that you've been able to update your realisation list. So that's worth thinking of. Category 3 is a medium-term hold. I would expect that there will be properties that you might have within your sites that you might not think is necessarily completely fit for purpose, but you know there would need to be perhaps significant capital investment to make a big change around that. That would be categorised as a 3, a medium-term hold. And the final category, as I say, is the default category. That's anything else really, that we would be categorising as a long-term hold. So as I've mentioned, there is an opportunity to change your realisation list twice a year, and you can work with your strategic estates advisor on that. And also there's no obligation. So if something's categorised as a 1 or 2, the property company is certainly not going to come and chase after you and say, when will we be getting this into the scheme? That's not at all the intention. I thought it was useful just to talk through a sort of a scenario that you might be working through, just to sort of try and bring this to life. So, you know, I keep talking about the list being reflective of your property strategy, which is what your strategic estates advisor is around to support. So a live example of that might be where you've got, for example, 3 GP surgeries, you know, within 2 or 3 miles of each other, and you know that 2 of those surgeries are quite underutilised, and there are vacant rooms in there that you're paying for. And then there's a 3rd surgery where actually it's really not fit for purpose, you know, thinking of, you know, a property where perhaps there's a very high repair bill coming forwards or something like that. So you might be working on a strategy around those 3 GP surgeries where the strategic estates advisor would be supporting an options assessment to look at what the best outcome might be to fix that problem effectively. So if you're working on a strategy on those 3 surgeries, I would suggest that all of those surgeries should be categorised as a 2, even though actually the outcome of the strategy might be that 2 of them remain and only 1 of them is disposed. It's sensible to put them all as a 2 because then you're able to then enter the one that is no longer needed into the scheme. I could go on and on about examples of how strategies work, and I won't, but hopefully that kind of illustrates how that works. So key message is really your strategic estates advisor has got the list. They are wanting to talk to you about the list. Hopefully lots of you have spoken to them already. We have had lists in, and we know that there's lots of lists that are work in progress. I'm going to hand over now to Mike Parker.
Thanks, Kate. Thank you again for inviting me. I am the Principal Property Vacant Space Manager for NHS Property Services, and I'm effectively the project lead and the process manager of the scheme. What I'm going to do too is quickly walk through how to apply and the process. I'll talk about eligibility, the assessment process that we go through, a little bit about the vacating payment and sum and how that's calculated, a bit about handback, and then a very brief case example at the end. So if we move on to the application process, it is a 4-stage process, and Kate's obviously talked about the first one in terms of creating the realisation list. We ask that you complete and submit it before any PVN or property vacation notice, which I'll talk about, comes into. Second bit is this property vacation notice. We ask that you complete it and ensure that it's signed by your accountable officer and the CFO as much as possible. And this is really the gateway into being considered for the system and for the scheme. The third element is would go on to be an assessment. So me and my team will take the notice and go through the assessment against eligibility criteria, and I'll come and talk to those about in a minute. And then our outcome is to try and get an informed outcome back to you within 15 working days. If we can't quite get there, we will of course let you know and agree a timescale for you. There are some further steps adding on about vacating payment and disposal by property services, but I'll skip those for the moment. So moving on to what is eligible. Kate's talked about categories in 1 and 2. And the majority of properties are going to be eligible for those schemes. As well as being in category 1 or 2, the property does need to be part of the transfer scheme in 2013 from the PCT, so it's part of the original properties that we inherited. So it's not, for example, any new properties that have come on board or come into our ownership since then. It's a property that we have a legal interest in, so it's a freehold that we own or a leasehold that we manage on your behalf. What it is not, although it's not PFIs are excluded specifically from the scheme, and onerous leases, they're what's called onerous lease properties. They're essentially where the current rents are in excess of market rents due to factors such as rent review bases, which the DH has accepted would be unfair for us to take back and bear the rental shortfall on. So there's a specific class that are excluded. But throughout the portfolio, there's only 45 or so of those currently. What else is also eligible? So those are the properties that are eligible. Then within the properties are also there are criteria which are listed here on the screen. With regards to those space that can be handed back, it is marketed with a fixed. It needs to be self-contained and a discrete space that is capable and physically capable of being let. There's a small size criteria or threshold for the time being up until April 2019, and that's 100 square meters. So at the moment, we're not accepting back anything under 100 square meters if it's part of a building. If it's a whole building, then we will accept areas under 100 square meters. It needs to be vacant, what it says on the tin for the terms of the scheme. I won't say anything more than that, but it does need. There can be leases and licenses in place when a notice is served, but at the date of handback, there does need to be vacant and clean, clear, and tidy. And the last criteria is being free of debt. So it's free of debt from the CCG, but it does on that specific property. It's relating to that specific property only. Assuming it meets the criteria in terms of being eligible in terms of space and property, we then move on to what my team do, which is carrying out some assessments. And there are effectively 3 assessments outcomes that can be made. Firstly, that the space qualifies, in which case we'll enter into talks around the vacating payment and the handover of the space without further ado. It meets all the criteria directly. There's also an element of properties or space that maybe it's known as conditional qualification. So it could become qualified if some works or something else would carried out to that space. For example, it doesn't have its own access, so that we could create an access with some partitioning, etc. That would make it qualified. So some work that would make it qualifying. And the final category is that it doesn't qualify. So it may not be actually marketable or lettable in terms of the lease. Maybe the lease prohibits that kind of exit out of the property, or it may be that perhaps there's no car parking that would be a barrier to occupation. Once we've gone through the assessments and assuming that it's either qualified or it's conditional, we would then move on to calculating the vacating payment, which is what the scheme is effectively more about. It's a one-off payment. It covers the risk of the transfer of the liabilities for outgoings to property services from yourselves. It's not a notice period. It's actually to cover the transfer of risk. It means it's a definitive entity or tenancy, or your occupation, or your liability, and it gives you certainty to plan around in the future. It's a sliding cost. It depends on whether the property is freehold or leasehold. For freeholds, it's 12 months accommodation costs. Leaseholds, it's 12 months, and for freeholds, it's 6 months. I apologise there. There is a discount if the property has been fully vacant and continuously vacant since April 12. There's a discount of 50%. And there are also potential costs called exit costs, which would be the cost to make it qualifying. So, as an example. Costs relating to condition doesn't matter that the property costs are dealt with elsewhere in the charging policy. And I'll just move on to assuming it goes through all that scheme, how to hand back, basically a little bit of the handover space. So where a space is accepted for the scheme, Property Services, we will work with you to prepare it for handover back to us. We'll take the keys back, etc. We'll work on those kind of things. When the handover takes place, the handover will take place when the vacancy is confirmed. So we'll go out and make sure that there's nobody left in the building, and that any acceptance terms have been met, and that the vacating payment has been received. That will dictate the date that we actually take it back. Until this time, ongoing costs will remain the responsibility of the commissioner, and it would include if there happened to be an occupier on an undocumented tenancy remaining in the building, who happened to outstay his welcome or stay beyond the vacation date, then we would defer the hand back until such time as the property is vacant. Once the handover is achieved, Property Services, we will take full responsibility for the costs, risks and opportunities associated with that space with effect from the date of handover. So it is a cut-off point with regards to liability from yourselves. I just thought I'd mention a very quick case study. This happens to be a freehold memorial hospital up in Thirsk. It's vacant, and the local CCG put in their realisation list and put in a PVN to us to hand this building back. Currently vacant. The running costs are around about £166,000 prior to vacation. The vacating payment's been calculated at £68,000, which is 6 months of costs when the property is actually vacant, so they don't have to do the cleaning, minimal amounts of security, etc. And that turns out to be about 5 months. So that's a payback within 5 months. It's early days for the scheme, but we are starting to get a few more into the system. And on that note, I think I will hand back to John, if I may. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mike. Thanks, Kate. So just a couple of comments really before we get on to this today. The scheme has been launched. We haven't had a tidal wave yet. We've had a number of inquiries, realisation lists settled, and PVNs starting to come through. But as Kate said, we haven't had a tidal wave yet. But bizarre as it may seem, we'd quite like one. It creates a risk for us, and it creates, a certain amount of work that we've got to do to try and get rid of surplus space. But we're happy to take that risk because we know that if we do our job properly, it will create a benefit for the NHS and lower the cost of property overall. So from that point of view, bring it on. There are some exclusions as were highlighted just now. It actually represents a pretty small percentage of the portfolio. It sounds a little bit onerous, but we just feel we have to point this out. It really relates to the small number of onerous leases and the fairly small number of PFIs that sit within our portfolio. out of 3,500 buildings, we're talking about less than 100 that would go into that category. And the reason for this is, this is an initiative to try and help the system. If all that stuff got shunted back, we wouldn't be able to do much with it. So it would still reside within the system as a problem. And really the intent of this is to drive portfolio efficiency for the benefit of the NHS. So hopefully from all of that, things are a little clearer about how this operates. We are available now for Q&A if you're too shy to speak or send us a message now. We'd be delighted to hear from you separately. Oh, thanks, Kate. Kate's just moved it on to the next slide. So there's some contact details if you'd like to get in touch with us. But with that, I'll hand it back to Julie. Thank you, Julie.
Okay, thank you. I've never known CCG people to be shy, so...
okay, well, let's see.
Well, they want to say who they are is maybe another thing, but I'm never shy. So yes, please do let John and colleagues have your comments, questions, views, and we'll pick them up as we go through. So far, we've only just got one. So the question coming through is, does the scheme apply to properties which are part vacant, where the CCG is paying for the void? I can see nods.
Yes.
The simple answer to that, Andrew, is yes.
I mean, the key thing here is, we don't want buildings to turn into sort of Swiss cheeses of vacancy, and we think we have to work intelligently with occupiers to create vacant space that's configured sensibly in a building.
Lettable space.
Yeah, exactly. But if it's over 100 square meters, that's as long as you can actually get to it. You don't have to walk through somebody else's space to get in there, because obviously if we end up getting a external tenant to the NHS, for example, you don't want them walking through your space. So that was the reason for that criteria. But we don't want 5 square meters sort of behind the hot water pipes coming back, because there's nothing you can do with it, and the scheme isn't satisfying its key purpose, which is driving efficiency for the NHS.
Great. Okay. Thank you. Another question: what is the time frame from submission of forms and realisation list to the end of the qualification decision process?
I'll answer that one. Ideally, we'll be back to you within 15 working days. As part of the policy. We would hope to get back to you from initial receipt of the property vacation notice. We'll predicate that by assuming that we do have the realisation list in place, because sometimes the realisation lists either haven't come in or they come in afterwards. So we would ask that the order be realisation list and then property vacation notice. But we'll contact you almost straight away, just to acknowledge receipt. Nothing else.
Okay. Thank you.
I mean, I would just add, on the realisation list is the key first step, and if anybody out there is having any issues in actually getting engagement from strategic estate advisors, because it does happen from time to time, please let me know, because we don't want the whole thing to fall down because you're not getting that support. So I think that's the key starting point in this. That's the key starting point of the conversation. So if for any reason you're banging your head against the wall and you're not getting what you need on that, I'm happy to take it up with the strategic space.
And I'd ask a question to the CCG people on the webinar. Do you know who your strategic estate advisor is? So it'd be good to get any views. If you don't know, if you don't believe colleagues know, then do drop us a note, because that would be good. We did circulate to the membership the list of strategic estate advisors out via Connect. The board with NHS Property, so that came out of that. So if you don't know, we can let you know, and so that would be helpful. So another question about the realisation list: is there a template for the realisation list?
There is. So your strategic estates advisor has got the template. It's, as I say, it's a download of all of the property data that we've got against each of the CCGs. So yes, it's in a fixed template format. And the reason for it being a fixed template is that effectively, once we've got all of those realisation lists in, it will then become one very big list that Mike and his team are working on and referring to. Yes, there is a template, and again, you know, as John said, if you haven't got the engagement with your strategic estates advisor, and that would probably only be because somebody else in your organisation might have the relationship, but you know, please let us know, and we can link you in.
Okay, great, thank you. Question: can I have clarity on if the vacant space is not required by the CCG only or the wider NHS family?
It's only about the CCGs actually. So the CCGs are responsible for that space. Clearly, if you know, within an STP group or something like that, that the CCG knows that you know, one of the sister organisations in the STP needs the space, then you know, we can work together sort of in a tripartite fashion to transfer that liability over. But effectively, from the CCG's point of view, this is about your financial exposure.
Yeah.
So I would encourage that if the CCG doesn't need it, then you know, pop it into the scheme.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
I think there's a discussion to be had between CCGs and providers where there are opportunities, but what we didn't want to do was go round the CCG. The CCGs need to be leading the conversation about where services are commissioned from. If we opened it up to providers, I think it would create a management problem for CCGs.
Yeah, no, I think that's the right route to go down. Okay, another one. If a CCG declares a property vacant and puts it on the open market, can a GP purchase it to become a surgery if supported by the CCG?
It's an interesting question. I mean, we don't sell buildings as a matter of policy that have a need for commissioned services from them. So I don't think so. I'm struggling to understand why we would want to do that. Why, you know, when we own the property, it's got services commissioned out of it.
Yeah.
You know, if there's a need
Sounds
to
like
continue doing that.
It's a completely vacant property. There's nothing else going in it. So it's a question about whether that needs to continue to be on the.
But it won't have been declared surplus, presumably.
So
there's a need for commissioned services.
So Diane, can you tell us a bit more about that so we can sort of understand it? So we'll come back in it.
Yeah, I mean, if we want to take that one up offline, I'm happy to have the conversation.
So if you want to pick that up offline, we can pick that up. We can let you know where Diane is from.
Thank you.
So okay. Oh yes. I'm happy to talk it through with you. Can you just give me some more examples of what constitutes an onerous lease?
So I think, you know, where as Mike said earlier, you know, there are a few leases, and as Mike said, it's only a handful, a couple of dozen or something. But it's where, for one reason or another, the rent is significantly above market. In other words, handing it back, there's no way that you can mitigate the liability fully. And you know, to some extent, it's the same argument as you have with PFIs. You know, these are leases agreements, should I say, that have a very long time to run and don't resemble market terms. You know, and they're subject to RPI increases. You know, what we're trying to do, as everybody knows, there's quite a lot of PFI property that has empty space in it. Seeing as the system is saddled with those contracts for the time being, it makes sense to sweat those assets harder and commission services out of them, and get rid of, you know, the space around it that you know, it's possible to get rid of. Otherwise, we're not going to help the system. We're just going to move liability from one place to another, and there's in fact a danger that you make things worse because you would encourage people to hand back space in PFI buildings and go off and acquire space somewhere else. With, you know, just to bring the operating costs down on a sort of, you know, granular basis rather than looking at the wider system impact. And I think it's important that what we do is a benefit to the wider system as well as the budget holders themselves.
Is there a specific percentage above market rent that is classified as significantly, or is it on an individual basis? Just for CCGs, they'd probably welcome a bit of clarity so you don't get inundated with things that are.
It's really on an ad hoc and case-by-case basis.
And
There's no hard and fast rule. 45.
So out of 3,500, it's a tiny number.
A better example would be where a building was specially commissioned and it had a very high construction cost, which it wouldn't otherwise, a market rent wouldn't otherwise have generated a return to the developer. In those circumstances, the passing rent is way up, is way in excess, maybe 2-3 times the level of what would otherwise be expected in the market for rent to be paid. So it's those specialist type of properties.
And we just on the PFI thing, we have only 28, I think, PFIs in the portfolio. So again, it's a relatively small number, but we felt compelled to call them out here because we don't want unhappy campers who thought everything was included. So we feel it necessary to mention the exclusions and try and explain the reasoning. But the good news is there's thousands of properties that are included. That's what we want to hear from everyone.
Yeah, good. Okay, another one. On subsequent submission of the realisation list, do you ask for an updated list so that properties becoming vacant in that time are added?
Yes. What the reason for the update to the realisation list was actually when we were sort of formulating the policy with the Department of Health and NHS England, they were very alive to the fact that things change very often. Actually planning property strategy is not at all easy in a very changing environment that we're all working in. And so the reason for the opportunity to change the list is so that you can add things or take things away. Clearly as part of that, then, actually if you've put a number of your properties into the vacant space scheme already, then yes, we can certainly take the opportunity to strike them off the list. But it's more around the fact that actually, a property that, in June 2017 looks like it was going to be a long-term hold, but actually things have changed and, it's something that you are likely to want to put into the vacant space scheme, at June 18, for example, then you've got that opportunity to do that. We just think that that's sort of the fairest way to do it.
Okay. It's probably worth adding as well that the existence of this scheme and the exclusion of anything from it doesn't mean that we're not here to help try and find ways of mitigating costs anyway.
Yeah.
We're still there. We'll still endeavour to find an occupier for PFI space, for example, even though it's excluded. It's not part of the scheme.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. We have no other questions at the moment. So do feel free to submit any to colleagues. So one for me, you've talked about not having an avalanche and you said you've got a trickle or decent trickle. Is it consistent across the country, or are there any sort of parts of the world where things are very active and things are very quiet? Is there a reason for that?
Southwest is very quiet.
Right.
And Western Midlands is another area where we've had no realisation lists in. Not sure. We don't know the reasons why it's particularly quiet. Otherwise it's generally spread geographically. It's across the country in terms of property vacation notices that have been received. Yeah. The North East was very quick off the mark with a few. London has come along with a few recently, but it's spread across.
We believe that lots of realisation lists are work in progress. I think people are getting their heads together, and it's not going to be a job that someone's going to do by themselves, really. No. So we think that there is quite a bit going on, but the scheme was only launched at the back end of the summer. So it's
early days.
Yeah.
So hopefully, as a result of this webinar and sharing the recording of it, then that will stimulate a bit more.
We hope so. Yeah.
Which will be good. So Any other questions from colleagues on the webinar? You don't have to keep going till 2 o'clock. I'm sure people have got other things to do, or even have a very rare few minutes lunch break.
Quiet contemplation.
Quiet contemplation. You never know. That would always get handy. So we'll give a couple more minutes to see if anything comes through. But if not, we'll close down the webinar then. But we will get the recording out, and we will share the slide set after the webinar. So those of you who might have joined late or want to share with colleagues will be able to do so. And hopefully you can have a conversation locally about what you want to do to actually develop your realisation list and support delivery of your strategy.
I'm happy to take questions.
Okay.
Offline on.
Excellent. So we'll and so should people so on the webinar slide set, should we go to that customer service email address or to?
Yeah, I'll just get through the customer service first of all. They can come through Vacant space if they really wish to, but customer service would be the first point of call.
Okay, so if you do want to follow up things, then email the customer.service@property.nhs.uk. Yes, Ian, the presentation will be sent out to you following the webinar. Okay, so I think let's call it a day. So thank you to everybody from NHS Property Services for
thank you very much.
the presentation. You're more than welcome. Thank you to all of our CCG colleagues for participating. We will get everything out to you, and I hope to hear there's lots of realisation lists coming through at a time and a place somewhere near us all. Okay, thank you and good afternoon.
Thanks.